All right, our next guest, we've been telling you about him, spent 22 years in the LAPD working gangs, homicide, narcotics, was part of a federal gang task force. He spent 3 years investigating the murders of rappers Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur. And he writes all about it in Murder Rap, the untold story of the Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur murder investigations. The stories are now told. Greg Kading, good morning to you.
Good morning.
This has been something that has been unsolved for so many years. What do you think happened in both their murders?
Curiously, it's not as big a mystery as everybody thinks. The cases got very convoluted when certain people came and injected themselves in and started providing information that took the whole investigation in regard to the Biggie one down a rabbit hole. And we've since disproved that theory.
What was the theory?
That theory originally was that the LAPD was involved somehow at the direction of Suge Knight, a guy named David Mack, and Rafael Perez, the Rampart scandal, that they were somehow involved in the murder of Biggie.
Then there was a guy outside the Peterson Automotive that night, Orlando or something. Some guy got killed. Did you guys go down that road?
Orlando was there that night, but Orlando now, we've discovered, is the one who actually shot Tupac in Las Vegas 6 months earlier.
Right.
His uncle stepped forward and confessed to participating.
Okay.
All right, these are two incredibly high-profile murders and two unsolved murders.
Not to you, though.
Why are they unsolved?
Absolutely not.
That's number one. Number two, who did it?
Well, the Tupac Shakur murder in Las Vegas was some Southside Crips that were doing some kind of quasi-security for Puffy Combs and Bad Boy when they were out here on the West Coast doing their concert tours. Puffy and Suge Knight had this growing animosity between each other that was just increasingly getting worse until actual friends of theirs were starting to die. According to Keefe D, who was the individual in the car that night with Orlando Anderson when they shot and killed Tupac, they did that at the direction of Puffy Combs, trying to eliminate Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur.
According to your information, did he pay them?
No, according to his information, he was not paid. However, he was told a payment was forwarded to him that he never received.
Now, Puffy is aware of these allegations, and he's always been extremely
very
adamant
upset about it.
Of course, very upset, but you think about his background with, you know, with those guys, especially with Big.
He was certainly not overly helpful in trying to solve this case. You know, we didn't get any cooperation out of the Bad Boy camp, and
Did you question him?
He was questioned. He didn't want law enforcement to question him. Had to be people out of the LA Risk Management Division. He didn't want the actual homicide investigators.
How does he get to say that?
Through his attorneys.
Why does
they insulate him quite well?
From the cops.
Absolutely. You don't have to participate in an
Part of the problem here is that a lot of people are skeptical about everything. Skeptical about the cops, skeptical about the stories, and also some of the people you talk to who have a lot to gain by telling untrue stories. That's some of the criticism you're getting.
Yeah, and I would say the opposite's true. They have nothing to gain by telling untrue stories. As a matter of fact, if we discover that they're lying, they are then going to find themselves in a much worse situation than they were before. So they're compelled to tell the truth because that's the only way in which they can help themselves.
Suge Knight has been very low for the past few years, right? I mean, death row is no longer.
Death row is no longer. Suge's a shell of his former self. And
so in this book, you say that Tupac was killed by Orlando?
Correct.
Okay.
At the behest of
Puffy Combs.
Okay.
Okay, and that Biggie was killed by who?
He was killed at the direction of Suge Knight through Suge Knight's girlfriend.
So
who was
Suge Knight and Puffy are basically the ones that you're saying in this book that are responsible, but nothing's happening.
Correct. It was tit for tat. It was retaliation. Like I said, this was a growing, brewing hostility that was getting worse.
And Jill mentioned that some people feel, well, you know, these are black rappers, we're not going to put that much energy into it.
Right, like you guys were criticized for that. Like, well, that's why this case remained unsolved for so long, because nobody cared.
That's an uninformed perspective. The LAPD put
But it was a perspective of the black community.
Correct. But if they knew how much effort the LAPD initially put into this thing, I think they'd think otherwise. What happened was an LAPD investigator misread, misdiagnosed some clues, and that took everything down a rabbit hole. You add into that the issues going around with Rampart Division at the time.
Right.
There was some circumstantial evidence that looked like maybe they were connected. But that took on a life of its own and has
And then the whole East Coast, West Coast thing, which a lot of rappers that I've spoken to, including Snoop Dogg and Dre and KRS-One and Warren G, they say that that was inflated by people like the LAPD.
Yeah, nothing could be further from the truth. That was a true...
Well, they're certainly fine now, I know that.
Yeah, things are cool now, but back then, 15 years ago.
So what happens? These just remain unsolved and that's it?
I hope not. That's why one of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to prompt people to move this, to force this thing forward.
Excuse me, why aren't you a cop anymore? What happened?
I left for several reasons. One was to do this. I wanted to try to take the opportunity. Both these cases were shelved by...
Did you reopen the cases, or personally you did that? You didn't do that through the LAPD?
The LAPD pulled me in to initiate a reinvigorated investigation after the lawsuit with Valletta Wallace against the city. They reestablished a...
That's Biggie's mom.
Correct. They reestablished a task force. They brought people in to try to get to the bottom of it.
And this uncle who you say confessed to you about was he there when Tupac was shot?
Yeah, he was in the car.
He was in the car.
actually handed the gun to the back seat in Las Vegas. He hands the gun
to his nephew who shot Tupac.
Correct.
All right, the book is called Murder Rap. It's if the storyline's a little confusing, it'll be all straightened out in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Greg Kading, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.